The history of the London Underground is full of drama, from the wheeler-dealing of Charles Yerkes to the personal dramas that undermined the building of the Circle Line. So it's perhaps no surprise that one of these tales should be turned into an actual drama. And that's what we get with The Truth About Harry Beck. Beck is famous for one thing. He was the inventor of the modern tube map, or diagram if you prefer. I covered the history of Beck's tube map in a recent video, so I won't go into too much detail about that process, and I'll link the previous video down below. That being said, if you're planning to go and see this show, you might want to wait until afterwards, before watching that video. Oh, and while we're about it, this is going to include some spoilers. Does it count as spoilers if it's a play about real historic events? I don't know. This is why I'm not a theatre reviewer. The play is staged, appropriately enough, at the London Transport Museum, in their lecture theatre. The play is written and directed by Andy Burden for the Natural Theatre Company. There's a cast of 2 playing Harry Beck and his wife Nora Beck. For the performance we went to see, the cast was Simon Snashall, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and Amy Vickers. It was a little weird for me, given that I've also played Harry Beck in a couple of Jay Foreman's videos, but that's neither here nor there. The basic premise is that we meet the Becks in retirement, and they tell us the story of the map in Flashback, from 1929, when Beck was a young employee of the Underground Group, through the invention and adoption of the tube map, to his later struggles with London Transport to be recognised as the creator of the map. History tends to view Beck as a somewhat peripheral figure, and I think people tend to map, so to speak, their own ideas onto him. Some see him as a frustrated artist, some as an obsessive nerd. Ken Garland's works on the tube map have gone some way to rehabilitating him, and Andy Burden has used Garland's research very heavily in the writing of this play. As for Nora Beck, she tends to be treated as even more peripheral. This play brings the two to life, and I very much enjoyed the performances. We get some of Beck's sense of humour and his love of music, which his colleagues recalled when interviewed. As well as Nora, Vickers also took the role of a number of other characters in the story. Interestingly, some of the other key figures in the story don't appear at all. We hear a lot about Frank Pick, but he never actually shows up. There's a very lively sequence illustrating how Beck put the map together, which even includes a bit of audience participation. If you don't like that sort of thing, don't sit in the front row. We also get a lot about the strain Beck's ongoing project put on their marriage, and ultimately the sense of betrayal when London Transport effectively dumped him as their cartographer. The fact that Nora is a central part of this play means that we get to see the drama from both sides. Beck is right to be upset, but is it really worth letting it consume everything? From a Tube Geek perspective, it is pretty historically accurate, I would say. There is seemingly a little artistic license employed. For instance, the Northern Line is referred to as that during a scene set in 1931, when it wasn't actually called that until 1937. We get some modern station names when at the time the stations would have been called something different. Archway rather than Highgate, Tower Hill rather than Mark Lane, and so on. Mostly it doesn't affect the plot, and if you aren't a Tube Geek, it doesn't affect it at all. I feel that it does capture the era well. It was a very different time for the Underground. I would argue, in fact, that the decade from 1929 to 1939 was the most important in terms of setting up what we think of as the Tube. It was a time when one person could make a huge difference. The network was seemingly ever-expanding, and technology was improving all the time. But it was also when things started to shift towards the corporate. We see how the Underground goes from individuals making handshake agreements to faceless correspondence, and how a man like Beck could get left behind. My one major criticism would be that I think it could have stood to be a little longer. The play is a bit over an hour, and there's quite a bit that gets skipped over as a result. It's not much time to cover 4 decades. For instance, we never learn why London Transport stopped using Beck's map, or how they came to re-adopt his ideas later on. I also think there are a couple of bits where it would benefit the audience to actually see what's being talked about, especially given that the essential subject of the play is something very visual. We are told repeatedly that Harold Hutchinson's version of the tube map is bad, but we never actually see it, whereas we do see Beck's map in several different versions. There are other things that we are told are splendid, but unless you're already familiar with the thing in question, you just kind of have to take Beck's word for it. I would say that this play works best in the context of being staged at the London Transport Museum. You can see the play, and then you can go and look around the museum and see what they're talking about. It's kind of assumed that you already have some knowledge of the network as a commuter or an enthusiast, but on the whole I enjoyed it. I think if you like my videos, you will also enjoy this play. It's running until the 5th of January if you'd like to see it yourself. Actually, tickets come with half-price entry to the museum, so you can do that thing I said, where you look around the museum and watch the show. I'll include relevant links in the description below. Nearest tube station is Covent Garden, or it's easy walking distance from Charing Cross, Holborn, or Leicester Square. Well, I hope you enjoyed this theatrical tale from the tube. If so, I would be grateful if you could leave a like and perhaps consider subscribing for more. I would like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your generous support. You are the circles to my interchange. I would also like to thank Official London Theatre for supplying the tickets, and of course the London Transport Museum and the Natural Theatre Company for a very enjoyable evening. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.